are now tuned in to the Storm Tracker podcast.
All right, it's the Storm Tracker podcast here. I'm Marcus Benjamin, and I'm joined today by Larry Blustein. He is an insider here in South Florida, has covered high school football for many, many years now, and has covered other sports. I have the pleasure of him joining me this morning. I'm going to call it Blue Mondays for now until I figure out a better name, Larry. How you doing?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Marcus. I appreciate it. It's getting closer. Now that the colleges are out of their spring and now the high schools are in their spring, and then it goes right into summer camps. I mean, it's a nonstop type of deal. The entire month of June is going to be crazy at every campus in the country because July is pretty much a dark period now. I'm gearing up a little bit. The spring has been good. It's been active. And as you know, following the University of Miami with the portal, things are never, you can't kind of sleep a little bit too long, or you're going to miss another kid coming in or going out.
Yeah, definitely. Miami definitely barely sleeps themselves, and football is 365 all year. It never stops. And like you said, Mario, this staff, the Miami Hurricanes program has been relentless in the transfer portal, and they picked up a lot of great kids, addressing some need areas as well, as far as defensive line, wide receiver. We finally see a couple of wide receivers come off the board here. So, I mean, Mario, from what we hear, hosted a pool party, had some kids over, had some, a family over, and he's really shifting the culture as every head coach does, right? They try to incorporate their culture or put their stamp on the program. And Mario's definitely doing that here in year two. How would you compare him doing that to other coaches that have come in and tried to infuse their culture?
Well, the way I look at it is, the coaches in the past would start hammering away. And then when they got a couple of kids or, got some targets coming aboard, it kind of stopped. Miami, the Mario Cristobal era has seen there's no looking back. He just continues to fire away. His objective is, in his own mind, his objective is to be in the national picture, winning the national title. Everybody would like to do that, but the difference is because of the fact that he came here with an objective, left a great position. You know that as well as I do. From a financial standpoint, if he stayed there for 10 years, he would have been, for many of his family's lifetime set. But he came back because he wanted to kind of bring back what was great about the football program. And you know what, we've talked about this so much. And it's a shame because, it's sort of the syndrome that if you're the second person in a relationship, you're always going to carry the brunt of the first person, So that's what's happened last year. Terrible roster, perhaps. And I've been watching University of Miami football since the 60s. I don't think I've ever seen a roster so bad. It was deficient in so many ways. You had no depth here and there, and kids were just disgruntled. There was no continuity. The coaching staff wasn't on the same page. So he kind of inherited that, and unfortunately, and had to make decisions right away by bringing coaches and, just to fill out the staff. He knew of guys, but he never really worked with them. So what happened is he learned, and he said, you know what, last year was last year. I can't change the perception of what people think. I can't tell them, hey, it's not my fault. But I think he's gone a long way from coaching to personnel and changing the entire complexion of this roster in the last 5 months. Bringing on new coordinators, bringing on players who have had experience from other schools and winning experience, not just guys that are coming from 1-11 programs, but guys that are coming from conference champions and programs that are, that have been conducive to winning, like Alabama, like in Oklahoma. And that's what he's done. And he has an objective, and he's set out to do it. And if you're not with him, you're not here. And I think that he's surrounding himself with a coaching staff right now that's hungry, that wants to teach, and that's on the same page as him. So I think in a nutshell, what he's done differently is continue to hammer away. Didn't step back and be satisfied with anything that's happened, but knowing that, in a baseball term, the score is 0-0. He doesn't look back and say, you know what, oh, well, we're up 4-0, or, let's kind of glide. No, every game to him is either they're down or they're 0-0. So that's been the big difference.
Yeah, you talked about changing the complexity of the program, and the way to do it nowadays in college football is through the transfer portal. And
Right.
I mean, it's not like kids couldn't transfer before, but the thing is now it's that players can play immediately, and there were restrictions on, if you were playing in the same conference or whatnot. But now, I mean, even with COVID happening, you've got an extra year eligibility for a lot of kids. So Miami is really looking to transform this program, not only through recruiting, but through the portal. And they've done a pretty good job so far, as far as adding players like Anthony Campbell, 6'7" defensive lineman, originally from
Right.
Bartow, Florida. And, players like Tyler Harrell returning home, and Jaden Davis also returning home as well. And then you add other playmakers like Ajay Allen, who I really like a lot, out of Louisiana, running back. He pretty much kind of replaces, to me, the role that Jalen Knighton was in last season. So you have that explosive, kind of a smaller type of back that can catch the ball out of the backfield as well. And Jadias Richard, another cornerback as well that they added. So first, just wanted to get your opinion on just the transfer portal in general, and if that's great for college football, and are we finally going to see some parity college football as a result of it?
Well, let me start from the beginning, especially with the transfer portal. And when we talked just a couple of minutes ago about changing the complexion, what they did is you bring in a kid like Cam McCormick, who they all knew. You bring in a Devontae Brown, who is somebody else who's had some experience, a Branson Dean, a guy that has some experience as well, a Javion Cohen, who's was a mainstay on Alabama's roster, Thomas Gore, guys like this. The Matt Lee kid, who I had an opportunity to watch at UCF, and a kid that I think is really, really good. You brought in a Francisco Mauagoa to change the complexion of the linebacking core. And as I said, even somebody like a Rocky Shelton, who used to play at St. Thomas Aquinas, went to Duke, very intelligent young man, graduated already, came in. You got the kid from Iowa, and Terry Roberts, and you take a look at a lot of these kids that were brought in. You talk about Jadias Richards, a guy that was a outstanding football player, either a safety or a corner, played with Twan Russell, son, who came out of St. Thomas Aquinas this past year. You talk about a Jaden Davis, a kid from Oklahoma that also played at St. Thomas Aquinas. Guys like that infuse a program and change the complexion. Tyler Harrell, who we watch so many times when he was at Columbus High School, get the job done. You mentioned Ajay Allen, a young man who was coming out of high school and everybody wanted him. In fact, even this spring, the coaches at Nebraska talked about how he was going to be in the plan. So to answer your question, I think the portal in Miami's case has definitely helped change the roster. I mean, that along with the freshmen that came in January, the ones that are going to be coming in next week, and you look at this entire roster and you can put it side by side to last year, it's night and day already. And that's how valuable the portals. There's two sides of everything. If you're a beneficiary of the portal, you love it. If you're losing kids left and right, you don't. But that's just
Right.
the nature of what it's about. I happen to think it's a great idea because it doesn't pin a kid down, to making a decision anymore. Because if he knows that if he's not happy or sees different things happening when he first finally gets to college, he knows that in the back of his mind that he could go somewhere else, but play right away and not have to sit out the year.
Yeah, absolutely. Now they've done a great job of addressing certain position needs. As far as defensive back, definitely. I mean, you mentioned Devontae Brown, Terry Roberts, Jaden Davis, Jadias Richard. So you've got a boatload of defensive backs added to that group. You also added a couple of defensive linemen, as you mentioned. You had the Thomas Gore kid. You got Branson Dean, which I've heard a lot of great things about, although he didn't play in the spring game due to injury. Now you also add an Anthony Campbell, who's a very big kid. Should definitely be in the rotation as well. And then they added Ajay Allen at running back, and at receiver, we finally saw some receivers come into essentially a Coral Gables with Shamar Kirk, who came from the JUCO ranks,
Yeah,
and also Tyler Harrell that we mentioned that came from Alabama, then Louisville, and then originally from Columbus.
right.
Is Miami addressing their needs here, with adding those players? And what areas do you feel haven't they addressed as of yet?
Well, from the players that you ran down and the players that I kind of looked at, you look at the offensive line and what you added there and what you have coming back. And I think that you look back at May 15th of 2022, and we're having this discussion, and you got a little worried because of the fact that even though that they haven't even solidified their front line, they didn't have any backups. Now, with the addition of a Lee and a Campbell, and then the emergence of a lot of the other kids on the front line, now you're talking about a different story. You're talking about a different attitude up front. Coach Mirabel's done a tremendous job. So I think offensive line you did. Quarterback wise, you are what you are. You lose a quarterback who really. I mean, Jake was in the plans, but then all of a sudden, Van Dyke had a great first year, and he's been pretty solid, and he's shown. And backup wise, you have a freshman, but I think maybe down the line, if there's a kid over the next couple of months that maybe going to be a senior as a quarterback, maybe you bring him in just in case, because I mean, where I love Ja'Cory and I think that he's going to be a really, really good quarterback down the future. He's just not ready to jump into an ACC every week starting role. So, I mean, he will be maybe next year at this time, but right now he's not. But you know what? Like we said, you look back at last year and what what the team progressed to now, you say, wow, I never envisioned that happening. Running game, you already answered it. Allen coming aboard with all the, Cheney, who I got to give some props. He graduated. Smart kid. He just, you got to give those kids, and he's still got 2 years of eligibility. So he could pretty much get his master's degree on Miami's dime as well. And his dad's a great guy, the head coach of Berlin, and he's done a tremendous job. I think he, when healthy, is as good a professional potential back as they have, because he's big, he's fast, he's strong. He's got great vision. just staying healthy has been a problem. And
Yeah.
and it's not for the lack of him being in shape, because he busts his tail. He works hard. Here's a kid who high jumps 7 foot. So, it's not like, he's not at the optimum level. It's just that he's injury prone. But then you have Parrish, who's a guy who showed last year, even at 175, that he doesn't bounce everything outside, and he goes tackle to tackle, which kind of helps, especially when you have a line that's not really knowledgeable, because you don't want them pulling, because once they start pulling so much to get him outside, there's going to be a lot of reaching back and holding. So with Javion Cohn, with Lee at center, I'm telling you, I don't think people realize what a valuable guy Lee is. I mean, I watched him at UCF, and the kid's, he's going to be in the NFL because he's that type of player. But running back wise, getting back to the running back room, you have somebody coming in, in two guys really, but one, I think in particular, Mark Fletcher, who I think is plug and play. I think he's ready to come in and make a contribution, because he's a big, strong guy. You watched him. I mean, he blocks extremely well. And once he gets that motor going and he gets into the secondary, I don't think many safety wants to come up and challenge him. So you have him. You have the kid Citizen, who we saw last year briefly, but when people watched him and you look back at his high school career, you go, wait a minute. This kid could be really, really something special. So your running back room is pretty solid. You had mentioned receiver. I think they went a long way in the offseason, especially during the spring, in seeing that Jacoby George can be a factor. Last year at this time, he just wasn't dependable. He couldn't, he dropped too many key passes. In the slot position, you have Richard and you have Xavier Restrepo. Now with the addition of Ray, you've got some things that are solidified there. Kobe Young. You bring in a Harrell, and you may bring in another guy. Tight end wise, they're potentially a year from now, if everybody stays healthy and things fall into place, they could have one of the top tight end rooms in the nation. I mean, Arroyo's been hurt, but once he's healthy, he's going to be fine. And the guys that you brought in, McCormick is going to be essential because he's been around. He's been around for a lot of years, so he's got a lot of experience. So I think from that standpoint on the offensive side, there's the only deficiency. I think maybe you could bring in another quarterback if you wanted, and then linemen are always essential. If you could bring in a lineman, you could go 9 deep. And but from the offensive side, I think that's probably what you're looking at. Defensively, up front, you always need work. I mean, Miami of the old was satisfied in getting a Leonard Taylor, but now you got to get 2 and 3 of those a cycle. If you want to be Georgia and you want to be Alabama and you want to be Ohio State, you've got to have 2 and 3 defensive linemen. So the essential is, if you're a football fan and you want to be realistic, look at the University of Georgia. They've had 26 kids drafted in 2 years, and they're still amongst the top 4 teams in the country. So that's what you got to do. You got to build a depth around, and that's what Miami's doing by getting all these young freshmen in there. So them combined with some of the transfer portal kids is going to produce that depth and that quality depth. You're just not going to have average Joes. You're going to have the guys, like you look at an Alabama roster and you go, oh yeah, I forgot about that guy. He was a 5-star 2 years ago. So that's the Miami of old. Back in the 80s, when you saw Miami play, and then you go to a spring game and then you walk behind a bench and see the names and you go, oh, geez, I forgot they had that guy, and that's how you build success. And I think Miami has gone that way. Linebacking core, we know they could continue to bring in guys. Mawagoa is what a boost he's been, because of the fact that he's a veteran type of guy. You have Wesley coming back, after a good freshman year. You have a lot of young kids that were recruited. So I think that it could be a depth issue this year, but it'll get stronger as these kids get acclimated and come in. And then, as you mentioned, in the secondary, I thought Darryl Porter Jr. had a really good spring. And, even in the spring game, the two passes that he caught, that he gave up, the long one was just, it could have been out of bounds. He had great
Perfect
coverage.
pass.
It's just,
Yeah,
it was a great pass.
pass. Yeah.
And then the one to Kobe Young that was kind of like an out, and Kobe's a big physical kid, so you can't play through him. You could cover him as well as you can. But yeah, I think with him and Brown and Brown's brother, and I think that the guys that they bring in, it's a good start. But you've got to go 8 deep in the secondary, and that's so the deficiency is going to be on defense. I think that they're going to give up some points against some really good teams. But I think that gap's going to start closing as they, as these big time kids that they got become more acclimated with college.
Yeah. When you talk about just acquiring players, you want to build depth, right? Because
Sure,
football is a game of attrition where you're going to lose guys to injuries. It's just part of the game. So when I look at this roster, and I say to myself, which area or position group would be hurt the most if it was if there were injuries to the starters? To me, I think it's linebacker, and I think if you lose a Francisco Malagoa or a Wesley Toussaint to injury, then it could be a very significant drop off to the next level. And you still have a Corey Flagg who's very experienced, and you've got a Keontre Smith also pretty experienced and has improved year after year. But you just don't want to be in a situation where you have to play those guys 90, 99
Yeah, no, I understand
of the snaps. So that's the area where I hope Miami still continues to look for another guy to add depth to. I know they are looking at the Larry Nixon kid from North Texas, so that possibly could be a guy to add to the depth there. But these young guys coming in, I think, really are going to have an opportunity. I've heard a lot of great things about Malik Bryant, a lot of great things about Bobby Washington as well. Love Marcelli Pulliam. High school tape, it's fantastic. I think he was a little underrated prospect coming out of Georgia. So really excited about him coming as well. And then Chase Smith is a guy. He's one of those guys that you said that, I forgot he was on the roster. He's one of those guys, 4-star guy, was an athlete out of the Melbourne area. And we still have yet to see him really shine. So this could be an opportunity for him to really show what he can do as well once he returns from injury. So out of all the position groups, I think linebacker is the one position that they haven't added. They besides the Francisco Malagoa, who I think is an obvious starter for this team. They have yet to kind of add another piece at that position group.
Right. Well, and you bring up a point. Even though they're not where they want to be at the linebacker spot, they're stronger than they were last year because you have a starter in Corey Flagg from last 2 years. The guy was your leading tackler on defense, and now he's kind of the first man off the bench, which is great because I think he's technically as good as anybody. He's just not big, a big difference maker in that way, but he's certainly a player that gives them depth. So I think they're better off than they were last year, but I agree with you. They got to get much deeper at that position because if you get one of your frontline players or even Corey Flagg hurt from a experience factor, because I still hearken back to the days when Miami had to use Duke Johnson and Tracy Howard as like they were seniors. Right away they got off the bus and they were in the starting lineup. You can't
Right.
do that anymore. Not and compete. A freshman could come in and get some good reps and maybe be in the depth chart, but you can't look to a 18-year-old kid and rely on him to be the difference. And that's where Miami's got to get to the point where these kids aren't just coming right out of the high school graduation line and being placed at linebacker or defensive back. Eventually, they all, mature. You get bigger, you get stronger, you get knowledge. You're in the weight room, you're in the film room, and you're getting a lot better. But right now, you can't. It's great to project a kid like a Geary or one of those guys like that are coming in, or a Washington, as you mentioned, and say, yeah. But down the line, those are the guys, and maybe when you and I are sitting here in a year from now, or even like 2 years from now, saying, see, if those guys would have, if we would have used them at the beginning, maybe they wouldn't be as effective as they are now. But they learned, they had a chance to get into the rotation without being the guy. Mauagoa needs to be the guy. Wesley needs to be the guy. But and even Corey, like I said, people minimize him. But he's been, like I said, he's been the leading tackler the last 2 years, for good or for bad. You just can't, discard that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's been a great player, and but Miami's going to need depth at that position.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that Francis Malgoa could start, more than likely will start. People think he needs to start. But you know what worries me, Blue, is the fact that Zion Nelson also started as a freshman. And now
Yeah.
he's in a situation where you may have overplayed the kid, because he has just, been playing, like I said, since his first year here. And now he may not be the guy that he once was anymore due to injury. Now, injuries happen. Some
Sure.
players, deal with injuries a lot better than others. But you run into a situation where you have to play freshman guys, and you don't want to be at that place. And
Right.
thankfully, Miami does have the transfer portal where they can insert veterans where they don't have to play like a Ruben Bain right now.
Right. Well,
I think that and like you don't want to have to play him. I mean, he's a great player, no doubt, and will be a great player for the University of Miami. But that's why you have to bring in a kid like an Anthony Campbell, because you don't want to run a kid like Bain ragged, and then he's struggling to get on the field in his final 2 years because of injury. So I think Miami has done a great job of utilizing the transfer portal, and I think this team can really, Blue. I drink the Kool-Aid basically every year on this team.
yeah.
Every year I think, okay, right before I'm just like, wow, they've acquired a lot of guys, they brought in a lot of coaches that I like, but I think every year I feel better about the previous year when it's the off season. But what I do like is that they have players returning home. And Miami has the advantage of being in this fertile ground. I think there's like 5 fertile grounds in the country. You got Southern California, you got Texas, Louisiana, South Texas and Louisiana area. You got the Florida, Georgia area, and then you got Ohio State, Ohio State, but Ohio State gets most of those kids. Ohio and in Pennsylvania
Pennsylvania too. That area gets a lot of
area.
linemen out of there.
So they have
Yeah,
the
you're
advantage
right.
of
You're
having
right.
kids return home. Is basically the point I'm saying. Do you see that as a continuing trend for the Kings?
Yeah, well, that was the objective, to try to get kids to stay home in the first place. I mean, I think that's kind of, that's the one thing that I know Mario Cristobal wants to do is put kind of a net over South Florida. But still, even when they were beating people senseless back in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, they were losing guys like Steve Hutchinson, and they were losing guys like Derek Thomas and Marvin Jones. So you're going to lose guys, but you want to, like you said, you want to keep, people like Ruben Bain home. But, you look on the defense and I think that the average fan kind of forgets all the guys that they have. Like we mentioned Leonard Taylor, but what about the Harrison Hunt kid, who I think is really, really a man, Messidor, who has probably as much of an upside as anybody. And then you start putting in guys like Corey Flagg into the mix. But you had mentioned before Keandre Smith. What about Chance Williams, who is here? What about Jacob Lichtenstein, who's in his 6th year? Guys like that, as well as I do. You sat on the sideline in high school and watched a kid like Nigel Lee Kelly, who I think has grown up as much as anybody. So, and to me, a kid who's a mystery, but, I watched him in the spring because he just won't gain weight, but you could see the talent is Cyrus Moss. I mean, I said, wow, he just won't gain. But I think what's going to happen, he's going to have to, and I think he's going to be a much better for it. And then we talk about the secondary, and with the addition of some of these guys that came in, and you talked about them, a Terry Roberts or whoever. You still got Porter, you still got Corey Couch, you still have Cam Kinchens, who is arguably one of the best in the nation. You still have James Williams, who, and players like that. So they're building depth. I think a guy on the defensive line to watch this year is Ahmad Moten. I think he's a big, strong guy up front. Kid that started at Piper, then went to Cardinal Gibbons, and I when I watched him during the spring, he's a man child, But you're putting the pieces together, and you just can't go from one of the worst rosters to one of the best in just a year. It's going to take time, but I think there's no doubt that you look on the roster today and see some of the kids that are there, and whether it be young or guys that they're bringing in, to me, you have veterans that still need to show what they could do. I mean, they can't, we saw a lot of these guys who really weren't pulling their weight, who are not here any longer. I think this is somebody like a Frank Ladson. He needs to have a year. He's a 5-year guy. You Michael Redding, who I remember watching in high school and then went to IMG. I mean, here's a guy who's been around. You have guys like Isaiah Horton, who's ready to step right in. So to me, on this team, it's going to be, there's not going to be a guy just because you're a sophomore, you can't start. Mario Cristobal will start, and that he's going to start the best or play the best guys on that roster. And I think when you have guys who lead by example, like Cam Kinchens, like Xavier Restrepo, because you look at Xavier Restrepo, and here's a guy that ever since he was a little league kid was being doubted. But what he brings to the table is a work ethic, somebody that these kids can follow and say, hey, wait a minute, this guy, not real big, not the fastest guy in the world, but he produces. And the reason why he produces is because he works. And that's the one thing that I think that was missing in the past. I think the work ethic for the kids, they weren't driven enough by the coaches. And I think that's not going to be a problem now.
I agree. I do not think that's going to be a problem at all. You've been out there practice. It's just a different feeling out there. And I think these kids are really buying in, and I think the recruits are also are starting to buy in as well, as we've seen several recruits commit to the University of Miami within the past month. Speaking of high school recruits, you've been out in the field up in Sarasota recently, and will both be at the Palm Beach Jamboree this weekend. Just kind of share your experience of who you've seen on the road here, and just how excited are you to kind of get out to Palm Beach again? They really kind of put together a great event.
They do. They do. They have. I think it makes it great because they bring a lot of Miami teams, and I mean, obviously, as you said, I mean, when you're talking about hotbeds, I mean, the state of Florida is nice, but that South Florida area, Miami-Dade, Broward, is just hard to beat. And obviously, Columbus Palmetto's coming back, and they have some really, really good kids. But I had a chance to go to Tampa last week to look at a couple of the quarterbacks in the area. The kid Trey Hedden from Tampa Catholic, who I think is an emerging guy. Also, the kid Dees, who's at Lakewood Ranch in Bradenton, is making the move to Palmetto up there. You get a chance to watch these kids, and you see them, and some of the teams up in that area, like a Tampa Jesuit, a team that actually we got a chance to see twice here last year. We saw them against Columbus early in the year, and then watched St. Thomas kind of dismantle them later in the process. But, you get a chance to see some of these talented young men, like last week in Sarasota Riverview, as arguably one of the top players in the state, or a program like Charlotte, which has 2 budding linemen that are. So my objective is to see during the spring, a lot of programs that are outside the area. And then during the summer, I get a chance to go to Gainesville and Tallahassee and Orlando and Tampa to go to their camps. And you go and you spend 3 days there, and because now they're running successive 7-on-7s and line camps. So you get a chance to see almost 1,000 kids in 3 days. Yeah. And that's how I plan my summer out to do that, because to be honest with you, with a rare exception, South Florida is the place to be during the season. You don't want to go and, and watch a Hardy County against Avon Park when you could watch Central Northwestern play. So, that's how I strategize what I do. And it gives me a chance, Marcus, to see, and I've done this for a long time. So going to Orlando and seeing a lot of the kids from the Central Florida, going to Tallahassee and seeing Georgia kids or Panhandle kids, and then Tampa, which encompasses all the way from Naples all the way up to the Panhandle. So, you get an opportunity to see those kids during the off season. So, a lot of those guys, like when you see some players and somebody talks about them, oh, look at this guy. I said, yeah, but I got a chance to watch him 2 years ago. I mean, that's the one thing. You look at some of these kids that are coming out now, and everybody's, say, oh, this guy's as good as they are. Like David Stone. I got a chance to see that kid when he was like 14 years old. And, you look at a Jeremiah Smith, who we had a chance to watch when he was at Pace, back in his freshman year. So you see these kids early enough. And it's not the definitive thing to see him at the youth level, because so much, when people go, I discovered him in the youth level. Yeah, that's a little too much, to me. I mean, you could say that a kid's going to be good, but I've seen a lot of failures too, kids that couldn't acclimate themselves. But that's the best thing about what we do during this time, because like I said, much of June's going to be on campus stuff. Miami's going to have a load of things, 7-on-7, special teams camp, line camps, so they keep busy, and nobody overdoes it anymore, because that you have that 1 month to get it done. And then the scene in July shifts to kind of the smaller schools, like a St. Thomas University or NAIA schools or Division II schools, because they're allowed to host events. So you go there and you see a lot of kids too, because there's a lot of big time kids that don't want to sit around. So they end up going. Kaiser University last year had 32 teams for their 7-on-7. And there were like 10 Power 5 kids, that participated. The Palm Beach Gardens kids, the Palm Beach Central teams, up Martin County, Vero Beach. So you get an opportunity to watch a lot of kids. You just got to strategize what you do, but during the spring here and during the season, there's no place to be but South Florida. I mean, you'd be fooling yourself. There's just too much talent.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm excited to get out to Palm Beach and see all the teams out there. Another great lineup of teams. A lot of teams that returned from last season, like Palmetto, Treasure Coast. I saw
Lakewood. St. Pete, Lakewood, we get a chance to see again. You had a chance to see Plantation. I mean, it's going to be fun because of the fact that, it's a long day. And I think last year, because of the lightning delay, it made it even longer. But it's a long day. They start at 10 o'clock in the morning. The last scheduled game is supposed to start at 8 7:45. So if
Yeah.
you put in that day, and I've done that, 2 out of the last 3 years. I mean, you could put in
Yeah, me
13
too.
hours without blinking an eye. And, a lot of it you got to spend under the tent because the sun never went in last year, if you remember.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
it was ridiculous. But you know what? You start out the day and you have a lot of enthusiasm, and by 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, you're dragging a little bit. But
Yeah.
look at how many kids you get to see. Look at how we got to see Ray last year, play.
Right.
And Coach Gaddis, who at the time, if you remember, Ray was still committed to Clemson. So
Right.
here you had the Clemson coach and Coach Gaddis trying to wait each other out to see who would stay longer. And obviously Coach Gaddis did. And you had Charlie Strong there last year, Coach Steele, and you're going to have the same this year. It'll just be a different cast of characters. I'm sure Kevin Beard will be up there. I think Coach Harris will be up there. So, I think it's going to be neat. And then it goes right into the summer, as I said, because especially during June, I mean, you buzz by Coral Gables and every single day there's going to be something going on, whether it's, small invited camps or the 7-on-7s. It's it never was an objective down here to get kids on campus, but now it is with your nice indoor and the promise of what's going to lie ahead. So I'm excited, and you got to get energized for the next couple of months.
Yeah, absolutely. Bring your sunscreen. I'm certainly going to bring mine as well, because it's a great event. It's a long day, like you said. It's draining, but it's definitely well worth it, man.
I agree.
Just to see all the kids, and some of those teams I personally won't be able to see probably during the season, like a Treasure Coast or a Lakewood, unless they come down here for something. So I'm excited. I think this is the third year. They
had a 1 year at Palm Beach Lakes.
Yeah, the first year I went to me was the Leonard Taylor coming out party.
Yeah,
like,
that was at Lakes.
Guy,
yeah,
and he was just crazy. And
I agree.
I thought he was the best player in South Florida.
And Rockledge came in, and they had kids, and like you said, you get a chance to see programs like that come down, and that's what they do. I think they lure a lot of these programs from outside the area with the fact that there's Miami teams. And, everybody wants to compete against a Miami team because, you see it, whether you go to UCF or Florida or USF during the summer, when you have a Booker T. Washington or you have a Northwestern, like at UCF last year. And I mean, you had one grouping that had Orlando Edgewater, Orlando Jones, Daytona Beach Mainland, and freaking Northwestern, and that was just in one group. So you get a chance to see these elite teams. There's a lot of smaller schools, but at the same time, a lot of these smaller schools also, as we're seeing from Benjamin and some of these Chaminade, who's virtually a school of only 450 people. So they're small, but they're powerful, and we're excited about that.
Another player that kind of stood out last year at the Palm Beach Jamboree was Stanquan Clark. That was one of those players that really jumped out of Killian. Of course, ends up transferring to Miami Central. But there's going to be a gem or two that just kind of pop out of nowhere, and then we have to talk to the coaches about that said player and just be like, oh, where's this guy come from? And
I agree.
And we just bring that information to the masses.
But you make a good point. I mean, because here you were last year and you had Stanquan Clark, who happened to just be playing next to Washington. So you got a chance to see, how good these both of them were. And you make a great point, because you get a chance to, to look at some of the top talent around. I'm kind of excited to see what's going to go on this year in that event.
And then the camps as well. My calendar is totally filled up for June. I'm excited for that. I'll be on campus. I need to get a dorm over there, like a dorm room where I could just stay for the night, because it's a trek from where I'm from. But I'm excited for this next couple of months. But Larry Blustein, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Larry, for joining me once again for the Storm Tracker podcast, and we'll do this again sometime.
I
All right.
appreciate you, Marcus, and we'll see you this week. And we'll run into each other a lot during the summer, as you mentioned. And yeah, it's going to be a really, I think, another good productive summer, as it is every year down here. So yeah, I'm excited about the fact, and looking forward to this weekend. As we mentioned, Miramar is going to be there, and I had a chance to go to their spring game last Friday. And they have some pretty good kids. And as you mentioned Lakewood and Treasure Coast will be there. Delray Atlantic is going to be there. We'll get a chance to also see Calvary Christian. And Boyd Anderson. So you gotta, and Coconut Creek, who I think is one of the emerging teams around. So we'll see you this weekend, and then definitely during the summer a lot.
Sure. Where can people find more information from you?
Well, the best thing to do is you go to LarryBlustein.com, which is going to take you through Dade and Broward. We do all features, we do rankings, we do all that stuff. And then our statewide coverage is on Prep Red Zone Florida, and good. I mean, we have 4 other people contributing, so it's daily. We have 92 team profiles up now and counting, where we give you full profiles. I mean, every kid that's a prospect with their a video link, all about the coaches, how you can contact the coaches there. And then also we have we do a podcast every Monday night, the 6th Ring Canes, which I enjoy. It gets a little bit heated at times. And then our radio show, which has been hopping around because of the Heat and the Panthers. But as the season winds down, we'll be every Monday night, 6 to 8 on WQAM. And we got you on there, and we enjoy having your insight as well. So, that's where you can find us. And we'll stop by here quite a bit as well.
Awesome. Thanks again, Blue. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Marcus.